Democrats are embracing a brand new form of wokeism. The old woke is dying, but something new and ugly is taking its place. We'll explain. Plus, Zohran Mamdani now wants to debate Donald Trump, and a shocking Daily Wire report, like a truly shocking report. First, the Daily Wire is constantly innovating, constantly growing, because the battle for the culture requires new voices and new ideas. We've told you about the importance of reaching the next generation, and now we're putting our money where our mouth is. On Monday, Isabel Brown makes her debut on Daily Wire Plus with the Isabel Brown Show. We've been talking about the fire and the unapologetic clarity that Isabel Brown brings, but frankly, you should take a look for yourself. Take a look at what's coming this Monday. Isabel Brown.
Isabel Brown.
Isabel Brown.
Isabel Brown.
The wait is almost over.
She's joining Daily Wire Plus with the Isabel Brown Show.
Cannot wait for you guys to see how hard we've been working.
I could not be more excited for this new adventure.
You can expect larger-than-life guests, deeper questions to the nerds.
Meeting the President of the United States and the Vice President, and now meeting our new American Pope.
This is crazy. So psyched to be bringing you guys along on this journey. Let's jump in.
This is exactly what we mean when we say the Daily Wire is expanding to cover every front of the culture war. And the only way to get every single moment of it, every episode of her show, every episode of every show we produce, all the movies, the documentaries, the investigative journalism, is with a Daily Wire Plus membership. Join right now at dailywire.com. Well, folks, one question a lot of people on the right and in the center, and even on the left, are asking themselves these days is whether peak woke is over. After all, we suffered through legitimately a decade of wokeness. Wokeness being the proposition that any disparity between groups was evidence of discrimination. And this manifested as DEI. It manifested as the idea that the government had to constantly rig the system in the reverse direction. It was the Ibram X. Kendi ideology, the Robin DiAngelo ideology, that, again, if any group was performing less well than another group, that had to be a result of a discriminatory system. And it feels as though, on a racial level, we passed peak woke. That simply saying now systemic racism is not going to result in some sort of left-wing policy. And that if you go up against that, you're going to be able to retain your career. You're not going to be fired. And there is peak woke with regard to transgender ideology, the idea being that if you are a man who identified as a woman, you are part of a discrete and insular minority, and that the problems you were having in your life were the faults of the systems around you, and therefore the systems had to be torn down in the name of justice, and anybody who argued with you had to be destroyed, had to be censored, had to be taken off the air, had to be punished. And it feels like we're past that as well. So where does the left go next? Where does the left go next? Well, the answer is they're going back to something kind of old. And what they are going back to is what could theoretically be titled economic wokeness. Economic wokeness mirrors exactly the same argument as racial wokeness or trans wokeness, except it applies to economic categories. And when I say this is sort of an old argument, it is, because it's basically the argument that was made by Karl Marx. And it seems as though Democrats are more and more moving in that direction. I bring this up because Politico has a fascinating piece today by Elena Schneider titled Democratic Research Finds Voters Prefer Populism Over Abundance. What do they mean by that? Well, there are basically two wings of the Democratic Party right now that are sort of battling it out for ideological supremacy. One could be titled the abundance wing. The abundance wing is led by people like Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, who wrote the book Abundance. The basic idea is that Democrats should be better technocrats. They should stop attempting to destroy capitalism, and instead they should go for better regulations. That if you want more housing, what you might want to do is actually deregulate the housing market in certain areas. Now, of course, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson are very strong Democrats, and they want more government involvement in a wide variety of areas. But their basic idea is that in order for them to achieve their goals, presumably of reducing income inequality or achieving greater fairness in society, that you actually do have to follow some sort of effective policies that make people richer, that make the society richer. Now, it's kind of an uphill battle in the Democratic Party, obviously, because a lot of the policies that the government involves itself in are actually quite bad policies. But that is one side of the Democratic Party. As Politico describes it, the abundance agenda is, again, basically this idea that overly bureaucratic regulations can actually make things worse. Democrats could move in that direction. They could move toward, actually running cities well, kind of a Michael Bloomberg approach to governing New York City. Michael Bloomberg was a quasi-Democrat, kind of an independent Democrat. Or theoretically, they could move in a more radical direction, particularly on economics. It seems, according to a brand new memo obtained first by Politico, that Democrats are being cautioned about relying on abundance ideas. Instead, they need to push for an economic populism that basically is rooted in grievance. According to Politico, the memo reads, quote, while there are elements of the abundance agenda that have appeal, and the choice on which messages to deliver is not zero-sum, a populist economic approach better solve for Democrats' challenges with working-class voters. If candidates are asking which focus deserves topmost billing in Democrats' campaign messaging, the answer is clear. Though some voters believe excessive bureaucracy can be a problem, it ranks far behind other concerns, and tackling it does not strike voters as a direct response to the problem of affordability. Now, you may be saying to yourself, well, hold up. Isn't actual good policy a response to problems of affordability? This isn't about solving the problem. This is about gaining political power, thus to wreck the system. This memo, penned by Kamala Harris campaign veterans Jeff Jaron, a Democratic pollster, and strategist Brian Fallon, and the liberal economic group Groundwork Action, instead says that what people really want to hear from their favorite politicians is that rich people suck and they should be destroyed. That's the basic proposition. Progressives, led by Representative Greg Kasar of Texas, have pushed economic populism, arguing the party must rebuild its relationship with working-class voters by vilifying billionaires and corporate power. That's more in line with what the memo argued will reach voters, as, quote, majorities of Democrats and independents and 2 in 5 Republicans believe the outsized power of billionaires and corporations in our government is a bigger problem than red tape and bureaucracy. So again, the idea is going to be that we blame all economic problems on the system, on the capitalist system that generates millionaires and billionaires, as Bernie Sanders would say, or on corporations that commit the grave sin of being incredibly productive and thus garnering a bigger market share. Now, the reason I'm calling this economic wokeness is because in order to see the parallel, all you have to do is basically replace one word. So again, the idea for racial wokeness is that disparities are in and of themselves signs of discrimination. Racial discrimination is in fact the norm. It is not aberrational. It's not bad apples. It's part of the entire system. And the system is designed purposefully by white people to discriminate against people of color. That is the basis of wokeness. It really goes back to critical race theory. And the rubric that I'm using here is from the experts on this thing, people like Gene Stefanchik and Richard Delgado. To get to economic wokeness, all you have to do is replace the word racial with economic. And now you say, economic disparities are in and of themselves signs of economic discrimination. Economic discrimination is ordinary, not aberrational. It's not just that there's one price gouger out there. It's the whole system is designed to price gouge. And who's it designed by? It's designed by rich people, not white people, rich people, to discriminate against the poor. Now, the beauty of economic wokeness is that unlike racial wokeness, which can be debunked every time you look at group studies, right? The easiest way to debunk the sort of racial wokeness idea that the systems are in and of themselves corrupt because they benefit white people at the expense of black people, or white people at the expense of people of color, is you can always point to a group that outperforms white people. Nigerian Americans are very, very highly educated and also black. Chinese Americans have extraordinarily high median household income. They didn't design the Constitution. When it comes, however, to economic wokeness, there will always be some people who are poorer than other people. Now, people move in and out of these categories. This is why it is a mistake to talk about, quote unquote, the poor and the rich. There are many people who are poor now who will one day become rich. There are many people who are rich who will one day become middle class or poor. There's tremendous economic mobility in the United States. By the available studies, if you are born into the bottom quintile of income earners in the United States, there's a better than 60% shot that you will not end up there, that you will end up in a higher bracket in terms of income by the time you are an adult. With that said, this sort of economic populism is rooted in grievance. And it's a real problem because it does have a popular appeal. It is one thing to claim that America is racist or that America is transphobic or heteronormative. Most people look at that and they go, I really don't know that many racists. I really don't know that many people who are like sitting around all day long thinking about transgenderism. No, actually, if I say a man is not a woman, that's just because that's basic logic. And if I say that people, ought to make better decisions in their lives, that literally has nothing to do with race. When it comes to the economy, however, when it comes to people's economic statuses, people have an amazing way of dissociating the rich people they personally know from quote unquote rich people in general. Most people in America know somebody who's wealthy. And I would bet that the vast majority of people who know people who are wealthy know good people who are wealthy and bad people who are wealthy. They probably also know a lot of poor people, some of whom are good and some of whom are bad, because people come in all shapes and sizes and all sorts of moral qualities. However, when it comes to how people think of their own economic performance, the easiest pitch that you can make to somebody is, if you are having a tough time economically speaking, I can fix it by ripping down this guy. Right? That billionaire should not exist. This is why Bernie is having a moment. Now, the only thing that is preventing that is continued economic growth. If we get continued economic growth, then economic wokeness doesn't apply. If people feel pretty good about their direction in the economy, then economic wokeness won't help because people don't feel discriminated against. They don't feel like they're put under the thumb. If, however, as we are seeing in the polling data, people do feel that they are stuck, that they don't have economic mobility, and they have an entire legacy media infrastructure pushing this lie, and they have people on both the right and the left making this argument that you can't get ahead in America. No matter what you do, you can't get ahead in America, which is not true. If you have politicians telling you that to garner more power, people believe it. And if they believe it, they start tearing down the very systems that generated prosperity, like free markets, private property, capitalism, in the first place. And so it's quite dangerous for Democrats to move in the direction of economic wokeness. And again, I'm not going to say that this is relegated to Democrats. I think there are some populist Republicans who would love to move in this direction, talking about how the basic structures of capitalism are deeply unfair. You see this sort of rhetoric arising, again, on the populist right. Now, again, I understand the art of politics requires getting elected. And getting elected requires dissimulating, dissembling, saying things that are not true. And that many politicians are willing to say untrue things in order to garner that power. That doesn't make it moral or good. And the sort of populist notion that capitalism is quote-unquote stacked against you in a country that is the richest country in literally all of human history, and in which people who are at the bottom of the economic ladder after income and wealth transfers, because we have massive welfare programs in this country, are earning about $45,000 to $50,000 a year, which is about the same, by the way, as the median household income in Germany or France. That's like the bottom of the pile for the United States after those wealth transfers. When you point that out, people get mad, but it happens to be the case. And so if Democrats embrace this next stage of economic wokeness, then I think that all of the pressure that's been built up, people feeling as though they are under the thumb, it's going to get poured in that direction. And that's why economic success is absolutely necessary. It's also why we need to make a robust defense of things like private property and free markets. Already coming up, a shocking story broken by our own Cassie Akiva here at Daily Wire. Really is an amazing, amazing story. First, when was the last time you bragged about your wireless company? Like, hey, did you know my wireless company gave away 1,000 American flags to deserving vets and forgave $10 million in veteran debt? Did you know that my wireless company raised almost $500,000 to prevent veteran suicide? When your wireless company is Pure Talk, there's a whole lot to brag about. You can even brag about the coverage you get with Pure Talk, a 5G network that is insanely fast, dependable, and secure. And you can brag about how much money you save with Pure Talk. Unlimited talk, text, 15 gigs of high-speed data. It's just $35 a month with mobile hotspot. Again, I'm using Pure Talk all the time. I'm not home, using it to call my family, using it to make business calls. The coverage is excellent, and I'm paying less money. And the company likes America, so that's a win all the way around. It's time to switch on over to my wireless company, Pure Talk. But if you need another reason, something to brag about, Pure Talk is the only wireless company that gives you a 1-year free membership to Daily Wire Plus when you go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Again, choose a qualifying plan at puretalk.com/Shapiro and relish your free 1-year membership to Daily Wire Plus. Pure Talk, wireless worth bragging about. Also, I'm sure most of us think that home security means that you wait for something bad to happen, and then there's like an alarm that shrieks at you, and you hope that it makes people run away. Here's the thing. Once an intruder is already in your house, the damage is already done. It's only going to get worse from there. Your sense of security, that fundamental feeling of safety in your own space, it's been violated. Real protection isn't just about responding to crime. It's about preventing the crime from happening in the first place. That's exactly why I've partnered with Simply Safe. It's a system built around the idea that the best security is proactive, not reactive. Here's how it works. Simply Safe uses smart AI-powered cameras to identify threats lurking outside your home and immediately alert their professional monitoring agents. These agents intervene in real time before the break-in even starts. They access two-way audio to confront the person, trigger sirens, spotlights, scare them off, request rapid police dispatch when needed, all helping stop the intruder while they're still outside your house. That's real security. I've joined the more than 4 million Americans who trust Simply Safe with their security every day. With a 60-day money-back guarantee and no long-term contracts, Simply Safe earns your business by keeping you safe and satisfied every single day. We love Simply Safe. We use it at our studios. It's how we know that when we leave for the night, our stuff ain't going to be gone in the morning. Visit simplysafe.com/Shapiro to claim 50% off a new system. That's simplysafe.com/Shapiro. There is no safe like Simply Safe. Why is private property good? Private property is good because you ought to retain the fruits of your labor, because you are an individual human being with creative capacity, and it is immoral for people to steal the things you create from you. Private property is an outgrowth of basic individual autonomy. Free markets are an outgrowth of private property, because the idea is that if I own the fruits of my labors, I can then alienate them, meaning I can trade them or I can sell them, and that we can trade, and both of our lives get better because I traded something I want for something that you want. That is the predicate of a free market economy. And that right does not begin with the government. That right begins with God, because after all, God made us in a particular way. The way that he made us was creative. When it says that man is made in God's image, sort of Judaic understanding of that is man has creative capacity, because the one thing you know about God from the very beginning of the Bible, like the very beginning, is that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God is creative. What is man? Man is creative. Man has the capacity to create. Man has the capacity to cultivate the garden, to labor. And so keeping the fruits of our labor is something that human beings want. This is why communism always fails. Because if you tell people they don't get to keep what they earned, that they basically should be treated as disposable labor widgets, and all of the fruits of their labor is taken away and redistributed, people won't work. They'll just stop doing it. It's why communism always ends with coercion. So the free market is not rooted in some sort of peculiar institution created by rich people. It is rooted in basic human notions of autonomy and individual worth. And that's why it's kind of scary when you hear an exchange between a senator named Tim Kaine, who you may recall was actually a vice presidential nominee with Hillary Clinton back in 2016, and Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas. So they got into an exchange the other day in the Senate in which Tim Kaine got very upset because there was a nominee for a position who had suggested that rights do not come from the government, they come from God. And this somehow set off Tim Kaine, despite the fact that this is very clear in our founding documents.
You state, and this is a quote from Secretary Rubio, our rights come from God, our creator, not from our laws, not from our governments. I find that very, very troubling. I'm a devout person. I was a missionary in Honduras. We've got other devout folks in this room, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, American. The notion that rights don't come from laws and don't come from the government, but come from the creator, that's what the Iranian government believes. It's a theocratic regime that bases its rule on Shia law and targets Sunnis, Baha'is, Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities. And they do it because they believe that they understand what natural rights are from their creator. So the statement that our rights do not come from our laws or our governments is extremely troubling.
Well, that is just a gigantic softball over the middle of the plate for Senator Ted Cruz, who knows the words of the Declaration of Independence. I mean, all you have to do is read that document once, as Senator Cruz points out.
That radical and dangerous notion, in his words, is literally the founding principle upon which the United States of America was created. And if you do not believe me, and you made reference to this, Mr. Barnes, then you can believe perhaps the most prominent Virginian to ever serve, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator. Not by government, not by the Democratic National Committee, but by God, with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Well, Senator Cruz had that one teed up for him, but that is a fundamental reality. This is why capitalism, free markets, these are good things. They're not just good in terms of being utilitarian, though they are. I talk about inlines and scavengers at length, why markets themselves are good, why they are morally good. They are not just good in terms of having good outcomes. And I hear it constantly from people, communism or social, these are great ideas. They just have, downside effects. They just don't work as well as they should, but they're kind of nice ideas. And my response is always, they are really quite terrible ideas. You know what's a great idea? Private property and free markets. They are great and moral ideas. Here's Red, Right, and Lions and Scavengers, which you should pick up right now. We are making a run at #1 on Amazon right now, so now would be a great time for you to pick up a copy. Quote, you own the product of your hands. As we have explored, one of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Lions is that man is made in the image of God, a creative, choosing being with autonomy and power. We thus have a right to our own labor. The philosopher John Locke, one of the great influences on the American founding, explained this right to property. Quote, every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body and the work of his hands, we may say, are properly his. Private property goes to the essence of what it means to be a human being. Without it, creative power is denied its source. Property is embedded in nature. As historian Richard Pipes notes, anthropologists have concluded that there never was a society so primitive as not to acknowledge some forms of ownership. Every child understands this reality. By the age of 2, children understand the difference between their property and the property of others. As researchers Nicholas Knowles of Michigan State University and Susan Gelman of the University of Michigan write, preschoolers demonstrate an understanding of the nuanced contrast between ownership and possession. They defend possession of an object more aggressively if they own it, and strenuously object when their property rights as well as the property rights of others are violated. Every parent knows this too. Give one of your kids an allowance for doing chores, then tell her to hand over half the allowance to her younger brother who's been sitting aside and casually watching television. You're likely to end up with a major and rather justifiable tantrum on your hands. Private property is just a reality of the world. Virtually all animals, human beings most of all, innately understand and believe in ownership. Human beings then develop rules and rituals surrounding the ownership and dispensation of private property, regularizing and cultivating a set of neutral principles that enable us to live with one another. From private property springs the system of the free market. It's time for Lions, for people who actually believe in the success of the United States, to robustly defend the free market. This is not something to apologize for. No, you are not immoral if you're a billionaire, any more than you're immoral if you are impoverished. No, there is no point, no dollar point where if you earn above this dollar amount, suddenly you're now a bad person. That's ridiculous. Nor is the rich person rich because he is stealing it from the poor person. We do not live in a subsistence society in which free market innovation and trade are uncommon. We live in the most commercial society in human history, which means Bill Gates did not steal a damn thing from anybody to become uber rich. And guess what? He made a lot of people much richer, not just for owning his stock, but also using his products or working for places like Microsoft. It's important to mention all of this because, again, I think that we're going to enter fairly soon an economically woke era. And there need to be aggressive defenders against that. Aggressive defenders on the right, and if people are smart enough, on the left too. Because free markets mean prosperity. Now, again, you can argue about social safety nets, whether those should be provided at the social level versus the governmental level, or locally, state, or federally. Those are all fair arguments. But doing what the Democratic Party is about to do and what some parts of the Republican Party are about to do, which is to say that free markets themselves are fundamentally flawed and that you alone should control it. You should centralize the power. That is likely to be both counterproductive economically speaking. It is certainly immoral. And it is going to lead to more actual interpersonal conflict. Because if you truly believe that people who are rich got there by screwing people who are poor, that justifies you in doing really bad things to people who are rich. And by the way, maybe one day you will be rich. Because it turns out, again, a huge number of people who are rich now were not rich growing up. I was not rich growing up. I'm very rich now. There may come a point in the future where I'm not as rich. That is life. And those decisions, for the most part, in a free society, are in the hands of people making good decisions. Alrighty, coming up, we will get to this breaking story from Daily Wire. It really is an incredible story, plus a very fraud hearing for RFK Jr. on the Hill. First, if you've been living on credit cards just to cover groceries, gas, bills, you know those interest rates can be absolutely vicious. Why keep paying 20% or more to the banks when you could call my friends at American Financing? They have mortgage rates in the 5s. They're showing people every day how to keep more of your hard-earned money in your pocket and out of the hands of the credit card companies. Right now, American Financing is helping homeowners save an average of $800 a month by using their home equity to wipe out high-interest debt with no upfront fees, no obligation, just a 10-minute call to a salary-based mortgage consultant. And here's the kicker. If you start today, you could delay 2 mortgage payments, which puts even more cash in your hands right away. Don't wait. Call American Financing right now. 866-574-2500. That's 866-574-2500, or visit AmericanFinancing.net/Shapiro. That's AmericanFinancing.net/Shapiro. NMLS 182334, MLSConsumerAccess.org. APR for rates in the 5 start at 6.327% for well-qualified borrowers. Call 866-574-2500 or visit www.americanfinancing.net/Shapiro for details about credit, costs, and terms. Also, Blinds.com. It's going to bring your space to life your way. From expert guidance to custom styles made to fit your project, they make transforming your space feel just as good as it looks. The only thing they treat better than windows is you. You know, the customer. Blinds.com has been helping folks like you for almost 30 years now. They've got this amazing team of over 100 design experts who actually know what they're talking about, and they're there whenever you need them. What's really nice, they get that everybody shops differently. Some people love doing it all themselves. Others want the whole thing handled for them, soup to nuts. Some people are in the middle. Whatever your style, they've got an option that will work. Plus, they back everything with that 100% satisfaction guarantee. And here's the thing. No surprises when it comes to the pricing. What you see is what you pay. End of story. They'll even come measure your windows for free. No pressure, no endless sales pitch, just helpful service. Especially great when you got those weird-shaped windows or a big project. The selection is incredible. Hundreds of styles with all kinds of textures, colors, patterns. Really easy to find exactly what you're looking for. Right now, Blinds.com is giving our listeners an exclusive $50 off when you spend $500 or more. Just use code Shapiro at checkout. Limited time offer. Rules and restrictions apply. See Blinds.com for details. Alrighty, meanwhile, speaking of this sort of scavenger mentality, perhaps the apotheosis of the scavenger mentality is Zohran Mamdani. Mamdani, of course, is lucky enough to have 8,000 candidates running against him, splitting all of the polling against him. He's still stuck in the mid-40% range, but he does have Eric Adams running against him, who's polling 10 to 12%, Curtis Sliwa, who's polling 15 to 17%, and Andrew Cuomo, who's polling somewhere in the mid-20s. When you combine all of their support, Andrew Cuomo could theoretically pull it out if everybody else dropped out. There's a rumor that the White House was offering Adams an incentive to drop out and Curtis Sliwa an incentive to drop out. Both yesterday came out and said they are not dropping out, which is just great. I guess we're just going to Thelma and Louise this New York mayoral race. Here is Eric Adams.
I'm surprised of how the standards of reporting in the New York Times has dropped so much. I've never asked for a job with HUD. I've never been promised a job with HUD. I have not communicated with the president. What I must do is what I've always have said. Stay focused. Don't be distracted by all the sensationalism. Run our city, keep it safe, and run for re-election.
Great. Well, if that happens, you're going to lose. Curtis Sliwa, who again, I like Curtis, but Curtis is not going to be the next mayor of New York. Here he was saying he's not going to drop out either.
You can't bribe me, you can't lease me, you can't rent me, you can't motivate me to lead this race. I am running as the Republican candidate.
Okay, well, then Zohran Mamdani is going to be the next mayor of New York. I mean, it really is that simple at this point. Meanwhile, Mamdani is challenging President Trump to a public debate, saying, let's cut out the middleman. The dare came after ex-Governor Andrew Cuomo called on the Queen Socialists to debate him 5 times during a press conference on Thursday. So, great job by Mamdani trying to duck Andrew Cuomo. So, Andrew Cuomo is his chief competition here, and Cuomo says, why don't we debate? And Mamdani's like, well, I'd rather not debate you, since I'm running against you. I'd rather debate President Trump, which of course only elevates him. No matter how he does against Trump, he believes that will get out the New York base, which doesn't like Trump very much, out to the polls. So Mamdani said, let's cut out the middleman. Why should I debate Donald Trump's puppet when I could debate Donald Trump himself? So first of all, I think that would actually be quite amusing if President Trump were to take him up on that, because Mamdani is a complete useless person who has never built a thing in his entire life, and President Trump would make that extraordinarily clear. So there's a case to be made that Trump should actually just say yes. What does he have to lose? It would be highly amusing. I mean, honest to God, I would pay good money to debate Zohran Mamdani. That would be a delight. That'd be an absolute sheer delight. However, he's in a commanding position that is basically just his way of avoiding a debate with the only possible competition in Andrew Cuomo. So good luck to the city of New York. You know, we're in New York doing this book tour right now, and I have to say, it's an amazing city. I mean, it's an unbelievable city. It is a city that is built on commerce. There's an author whose name is Stefan Zweig, who was very famous in Europe in the 20s and the 30s. And then he ended up killing himself during World War II out of despair at what had happened to Europe. But he wrote a memoir called The World of Yesterday. And in the world of yesterday, he traveled to a bunch of countries. He sort of describes getting to know the countries. And one of the things that he writes, Stefan Zweig, that is really quite fascinating, is he writes about visiting America. And he says, listen, when I went to Britain, what I found is that I could basically walk into a pub and I could get to know people just by sitting down in a pub and buying a drink for somebody. When I went to France, I'd go to a coffee house and I'd be able to sit down, just get to know people right away. Same thing in Germany. He said he tried that in the United States and it didn't work. He said he went to a pub and basically everybody was kind of standoffish. And he went to a coffee house and everybody was kind of busy. And so he wanted to know what it was that made America tick. What made America different? And so what he ended up doing was he ended up going to employment offices. He went to job offices and looked for a job, like applied for jobs. And here's what he writes about America. He says, my first impression was overpowering, although New York did not yet have the enchanting night beauty, which it now has. This is, again, 1920s. Or 1910s even. The rushing cascades of light in Times Square were not yet present, nor the city's dreamlike heaven, which, with its billions of artificial stars, glitters at the real ones in the sky. The appearance of the city, as well as the traffic, lacked the daring grandeur of today, for the new architecture was only trying itself out uncertainly with an occasional skyscraper, and the astonishing development of taste in show windows and decorations had only modestly set in. But to look down from the Brooklyn Bridge, with its constant gentle swing at the harbor, and to wander about in the stone canyons of the avenues was discovery and excitement enough. But he said that he wasn't really able to connect with anybody. He said there weren't any cinemas. There weren't any small, comfortable cafeterias or art galleries, libraries, museums at the time. He said in matters cultural, everything was still far behind our Europe. He said, I was swept along like a rudderless boat in the icy, windy streets. And so he instead decided to invent a game for himself. He said, I pretended I was friendless and alone, a jobless immigrant with my last $7 in my pocket. Do then, I said to myself, what they have to do. Imagine you're forced to earn your own living after 3 days. Look around and see how one begins here as a stranger without connections or friends to find a position. So I wandered from agency to agency and examined the lists tacked on their door. Here a baker was wanted. There a temporary clerk who knew French and Italian. Here a clerk for a bookshop. This last, incidentally, was the first opportunity for my imaginary self. And so I climbed up 3 flights of iron stairs, asked about the salary, compared it with the prices for a room in the Bronx, which I had seen advertised in the newspaper. After 2 days of job hunting, I had theoretically found 5 jobs by which I could have made my living. He said, through this job hunting, I learned more about America in those very first few days than in all the succeeding weeks when I traveled comfortably to Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, and Chicago. Because what he realized is that America predominantly was a place of bustling and commerce and job hunting, and Mamdani is going to kill all that. He's going to kill all that out of envy because he believes that's a bad thing. That's a bad thing. There's sort of enervation that has set in. This is the economic wokeness. Just as racial wokeness creates enervation in people, it teaches them no matter how hard you try, you're not going to get ahead because shadowy, unseen racial forces are cracking down upon you. Economic wokeness makes the same argument. That no matter how hard you try, you just can't get ahead. And you know what? That's not true. It is not true. Okay, mobility has gone down in the country. People are not moving nearly as much as they were. If you talk to Generation Z folks, their job picture, like what they believe that they ought to get out of a job, let's just say it's very different for a lot of them than it was when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. And either that's going to change or economic wokeness will win, and the results will be the tearing down of the things that actually make the country prosperous. Okay, meanwhile, a massively shocking report from our own Daily Wire, Cassie Akiva, doing the extraordinary reporting here. So you may remember that there was a person named Tony Aguilar. Tony Aguilar was a contractor for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and he was fired. And then he started making all sorts of claims on all sorts of major shows. So he went on Tucker Carlson's show, and he claimed the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and the IDF had been doing a terrible job, and the IDF was shooting children. Here was Tucker Carlson interviewing Tony. By the way, he didn't just have on Tony Aguilar once, he had him on twice, Tucker Carlson.
So let me ask you about the story that you have told that's a really difficult story, awful story, but about the boy who you were in contact with who was killed, shot to death. What happened?
So, this little boy is similar in age to my son, brown eyes. My son has brown eyes. I see my son's face when I look at him. And this little boy, you know, he's not ISIS. He's not a combatant. This was on secure distribution site number 2, the 28th of May, our second day of doing distribution. I'm on that location. I didn't get this secondhand. I didn't see it from afar and then assume I saw it. I touched it. I felt it.
Okay, and then he went on to claim that his boy was killed shortly thereafter by the IDF. He called the boy Amir there. Now, the Daily Wire had done reporting on this and found there were major inconsistencies in the story. Not only were the details he shared about their interaction inconsistent with third-party footage of it, the boy's stepmother said that she'd seen the boy alive for at least 2 months after Aguilar claimed he was dead. In a taped testimonial, Siham al-Jarabia said the boy did not go missing until July 28th. That's around the same time Aguilar began telling the story, but he said the boy was killed on May 28th. Okay, so the Gaza Humanitarian Fund commenced a search for the boy after Aguilar began telling his story, basically blaming the GHF or the IDF for the phantom death of the boy. And I say phantom advisedly because, as it turns out, after interviews with family members and weeks of detective work, the boy, whose actual name is Aboud, was found living with his birth mother after he abruptly left his stepmother's home in July. The child's identity was confirmed through biometrics. He remained in possession of a shirt that he wore in Aguilar's original viral video. In fact, here is tape of Aboud alive and well, thank God.
To the first drawer to the left, bottom left.
مرحبا
كيف حالك؟
والله كويس.
الحمد لله وأنا كويسة. شو اسمك؟
اسمي عبد الرحيم.
شرفنا.
Okay, so again, a pretty astonishing story, but very often the lie makes its way all the way around the world before the truth can get its pants on. Joining us on the line to discuss all of this a little bit earlier today, I spoke with Brent Scher, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, who of course was involved in breaking this story. Brent, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
So, I mean, this is an amazing story. How exactly did we go about tracking down this information about this kid who, again, was alleged to have been gunned down by the IDF, particularly by a person who was at one time working for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation? That was a claim that found an airing on Tucker Carlson, among other outlets.
Yeah, I mean, the story goes back about a month now when Tony Aguilar, who is the former Gaza Humanitarian Fund contractor, told the story to a very leftist outlet of this story about meeting a boy named Amir. And he told all these really vivid details of his interaction with Amir. You know, Amir kissed his hand and said thank you in English, just to then walk off, where he was then gunned down. And those are exact words by Tony Aguilar, gunned down by the IDF. Our reporter, Cassie Akiva, who, of course, is on maternity leave, but still ran down this story because she's an amazing reporter, she noticed immediately and reported some big inconsistencies in the story. And that's when this whole thing started to unravel. It was the small details of what Tony Aguilar was saying that didn't really jive with facts on the ground or what was seen in other footage. Now, after Aguilar initially told his story, the Gaza Humanitarian Fund went out to find this boy because they, like Cassie, didn't believe the story that Tony was telling. And, you know, they went through all their networks in Gaza that they have built while putting on aid for the last few months. And finally, they found this boy. He was not shot. He, in fact, had ran away from his home to live with his birth mother, where he's been for the last month. And I'll say a big thing here is the Gaza Humanitarian Fund was very concerned that this boy, who Tony Aguilar called Amir, but his real name is Aboud, they were really concerned that this story, which went viral in the United States, put Amir's life in major threat because his story became a propaganda tale for not only Hamas, but everybody else who wishes bad on Israel, because by saying that Israel committed this heinous crime, they got what is probably their biggest war, or their most successful battle against Israel right now, which is in the PR world. So they thought that Hamas would go through great lengths to keep the fact that Amir was alive hidden from the world. But thankfully, due to their work and Cassie's reporting, now the world knows this whole thing has been a lie.
I mean, it's an amazing story, and it just demonstrates, again, the willingness to hear this out. I mean, this was like a full episode of Tucker's show. He appeared, I believe, with Senator Chris Van Hollen, Tony Aguilar, to tell this story. It turns out that was a completely false story. And again, the Daily Wire had reported last month that there was a review of body cam footage from an American security contractor who's literally standing next to Tony Aguilar that showed a different interaction than what Aguilar originally described. It showed the boy walking up to the man wearing the body cam and kissing his hand, and then turning to Aguilar and asking for help, convincing the crowd to let them take the food. And Aguilar touches the boy's shoulders and chest. And then Aguilar says, this little young man here, obviously pretty young, he has food, go home, okay, thank you. And then the boy walks toward the crowd. So we did actually reach out to Tony Aguilar for comments on this. What did he have to say?
Yeah, so that's actually really interesting. Aguilar, about a month ago, when we wrote this initial story on the inconsistencies, Aguilar got back to our reporter, and he said actually that he never actually confirmed that Amir was dead, but he saw a boy laying there and assumed that he was dead. After we challenged the facts, in the past few weeks, his story has gotten only more vivid. He's told podcasts lately that he watched Amir get shot in the leg, shot in the torso, and saw him dead on the floor. Now, again, we now know that the boy is alive and well. He has 0 bullet wounds. So, I mean, we can't get inside Tony Aguilar's head and know whether he's actually mistaken or whether he just spun this whole thing up. But nothing that he's said before our initial report or since has been anywhere close to true or proven true.
Now, again, one of the things that's amazing here is that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation moved to protect this kid. And that does raise the question as to why they would have to protect the kid, except that presumably Hamas would want to retcon this thing by actually killing the kid. Hamas would want to get a hold of the child, kill the child, and then essentially say to the rest of the world that the story must have originally been true because the kid is dead. I mean, that would be the logical reason to put this kid under protection. Theoretically, if Hamas were interested in protecting the civilian population, he would have been perfectly safe being alive and well in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, and I mean, GHF is taking an immense amount of care to make sure that this boy actually survives, because, you know, that's what their goal is, to be a humanitarian force in Gaza, a place that hasn't seen successful aid in months, years, largely because it's mainly been through the United Nations. But the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has done so much to not only find this boy, but then make sure that they can keep him safe from Hamas. Because as you said, Hamas does not want the world to know what we reported this morning, that the entire story of the Israelis just indiscriminately shooting children at an aid site is bogus. There's no basis in fact.
Now, so far, we've reported the story. Fox News has picked up on the story. That's about it. You have not seen legacy media reporting on the story in any real way, which, again, demonstrates that the lie can make its way all the way around the world before the truth gets its shoes on in the morning. Are you surprised at all that the legacy media have not picked up on the story?
I'm not surprised that it hasn't happened immediately. I really hope that they do their reporting and get in touch with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, read our work, and see that it is indisputably true that this boy, that MSNBC, for one, did a whole report on their site, special report, video, interviews, everything with Tony Aguilar on how this boy is dead. That story has to be corrected. These podcasts, you mentioned Tucker Carlson, he had him on to vividly tell the story of Amir and use it as a, cautionary tale about what's really going on in Israel. Tucker Carlson has to address this. And you mentioned a sitting Democrat senator, Chris Van Hollen, had Tony Aguilar in, taped a whole interview with him with a senator. He needs to come out and say that, yeah, everything that I broadcasted to my voters and the people was wrong.
Well, Brent Scher, editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, credit to you, credit to our reporter Cassie Akivo, who dug this up. This is a long process, and it's very well substantiated. Go check out the report at dailywire.com right now. Really appreciate it, Brent.
Thanks, Ben.
Well, meanwhile, speaking of stories that have made their way around the world over and over and over and over, the story of supposed Israeli genocide, that is a lie. It has been a lie since the beginning. It is not a genocide. It's a war. Israel has been extraordinarily meticulous, actually, in its pursuit of the war. But one of the things that has been retailed, another lie that's been retailed, is that the reason that Republicans and Americans overwhelmingly, actually, are pro-Israel is because of Israeli money or Jew money or AIPAC money. And this sort of lie has been wildly trafficked, particularly in sort of the comedian bro world. A lot of comedians have been saying this sort of stuff. And, it's very hard to sort of deal with these claims from comedians because, on the one hand, they will make a claim that is certainly not a joke, like an actual serious claim. They are comedians, so they will then play a Mott and Bailey game where they make a claim that's factually untrue. They're called on the factually untrue claim. And then they put the clown nose on and they say, oh, well, I'm just a comedian. You can't expect me to get it right, which is really a silly way to do things. If you want to make a joke about a thing, make a joke about a thing. If you want to make a serious claim, make a serious claim. I think we can tell the difference. So, for example, Andrew Schultz, who's been very critical of us here at the Daily Wire for a variety of reasons that I can't quite discern, actually, because they don't seem ideologically coherent. Here he was, fairly recently, claiming that AIPAC is basically running our politics, which, of course, has become a very hot talking point on large parts of the left and, I will say, a horseshoe theory part of the right.
But the real decisions, like if we're going to send more aid to Ukraine, if we're going to send more aid to Israel, those decisions are already made because we continue to make them. Despite Americans not wanting them, the same fucking decision gets made, right? Mm-hmm. Over and over again. America does not support this shit that's going on here. None of us do. We're seeing the death, we're seeing the destruction. We're like, what the fuck is happening? Why do we keep supporting this? Like, what is going on? It seems to feel, at least at this point, that through AIPAC or maybe through other means, there's incredible influence on our politicians. I mean, Ted Cruz is just tap dancing for Israel left and right.
Okay, so again, the implication here is that Ted Cruz is pro-Israel because he's been supported in congressional races by AIPAC. Not that AIPAC supports Ted Cruz because he's pro-Israel and was already pro-Israel, but Ted Cruz is bought and paid for by AIPAC money. And this is a very common claim that's sort of made in the manosphere or made in the podcast bro sphere or the comedian sphere. It was a claim that was also made by the comedian Tim Dillon fairly recently.
If someone said, I hate gay people, I'd say, okay. But is that grounds for them to be deported? Doesn't this feel like it's going to a bad place? Does it feel good? Does it feel good? It feels a little bit like we're doing this at the behest of billionaire Israeli donors. No? Yes? Perhaps?
Okay, so again, the theory here is that all of America's politics is from the shadows being run by AIPAC or Israeli billionaire donors, not sure who he's talking about there, or Jewish philanthropists or whatever the case may be. That's really why Americans are pro-Israel or why Trump is pro-Israel or why Ted Cruz is pro-Israel or all the rest. The reason I point this out is because if you are going to claim that money passing hands makes you a shill for the thing from which you are receiving the money, then I'm wondering precisely why Andrew Schultz and Tim Dillon, among many, many, many others, are perfectly willing to go to Saudi Arabia for hundreds of thousands of dollars and perform for a regime that is responsible for a war in Yemen. By the way, Saudi losing the war with Yemen was actually quite a bad thing, or at least pulling out of areas that led the Houthis to be in charge. So I'm actually not even critiquing the Saudi war with Yemen. That was the Biden administration. But if you're going to be a war is always terrible, and the people who perpetuate the wars, they're evil. The only reason you'd be pro that is because you're getting paid. Let's just talk about Saudi Arabia and, the people who are paying people like Andrew Schultz and Tim Dillon to arrive. So I asked our sponsors over at Comet, how many people were killed in Saudi Arabia's war with Yemen? Quote, Saudi Arabia's war with Yemen has resulted in an estimated 377,000 deaths as of 2021, with the majority caused by conflict-related famine, disease, and lack of healthcare. Roughly 150,000 deaths are directly attributed to military operations, including airstrikes and battles, many of which were led by the Saudi coalition. At least 15,000 civilians were killed by direct military action, especially airstrikes. The answer is actually probably much, much, much larger, by the way. If the logic is that Israel is bad because war is bad, then Saudi would be worse because war is bad. But no. I mean, I assume that Andrew Schultz, who considers himself a social liberal, and so does Tim Dillon, that they understand that same-sex activity is still criminal in Saudi Arabia and can be penalized by everything up to and including the death penalty, depending on the circumstances. That in rare circumstances, amputation for theft is still a penalty on the books, although lashes has become more common over there. That migrant workers are still routinely forced into a form of trafficking very much akin to slave labor. That actually it took until 1962 to abolish chattel slavery in Saudi Arabia. That there is no such thing as free speech in Saudi Arabia. That if you're wondering about free speech, like Saudi Arabia ain't famous for it. But apparently, you're allowed to take hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Saudi monarchy in order to what? Perform comedy over there? Any critical words? Any critical words of the Saudi regime? See, here's the thing. I don't actually think that Saudi is buying and paying for Andrew Schultz or Tim Dillon. I don't think they're going to change their views on Saudi Arabia because Saudi is paying the money to go perform a comedy show. But if the claim that you make is that all of our politics is run by secret money, by nefarious forces, then you should be kind of careful about the people stuffing money in your pockets, shouldn't you? Now, full credit to Tim Dillon. He at least says the quiet part out loud. Seriously.
Get over it. Get over it. We're going to Riyadh. The House of Saud is paying us hundreds of thousands of dollars, some of us millions, not me, but they're paying millions of dollars to comedians. Get over it. We're taking the money. How about that? How about that? Sorry. Oh, you weren't invited? Oh, you got nothing going on? Boo-hoo-hoo. Boo-hoo-hoo for you. I would never do it. You weren't offered. No one invited you. There's people that I respect that turned it down, but a lot of people are doing it, like a lot, like almost everyone. A lot of people are doing it. They bought comedy. So what?
All right. Well, if that's the way that this goes, then I guess that's the way this goes. And I guess that's that bizarre moral high ground that you've been claiming, maybe you should let that one go, perhaps. Okay, meanwhile, there's a big hearing yesterday. RFK Jr. was testifying in front of Congress, and things got quite heated at this hearing before the Senate. The Senate Finance Committee had a hearing with him, and both Republicans and Democrats were pretty upset with RFK Jr. Some of the Democrats were upset with RFK Jr. over his take on vaccines. Some of the Republicans were also concerned about turmoil over at the CDC. And there's no question there's a lot of turmoil over at the CDC right now. And it's just a reality. The staffing has been a problem at the CDC. There are super qualified people who are working at HHS. Marty McCary at FDA, wildly qualified. Jay Bhattacharya over at NIH, supremely qualified. CDC has been a mess. Obviously, a lot of controversy coming out of a department that usually is less about vaccine standardization and significantly more about how to run, for example, the Medicare and Medicaid systems, which are actually gigantic, hundreds of billions of dollars programs. Well, the things got pretty spicy. Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, who voted in favor of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s confirmation, he asked him about Operation Warp Speed and vaccination because RFK Jr. has basically been making the claim that he doesn't know whether the vaccine was helpful in any way. Now, here's what the available data says. What the available data says is that the vaccine was wildly oversold at the beginning, which is certainly true. That is certainly true that it was wildly oversold. There were claims made about the vaccine preventing transmission. That wasn't true. Those were overtly false claims that were made by public officials in positions of responsibility without any actual research even being done on that question by, for example, Pfizer. We talked about it on the show when that came out. And then there were claims that kids needed to get it, which was never true, or that young people needed to get it, which also was not really true. And so the new standard has been, if you're old or obese, then maybe we'll recommend the COVID vaccine for you. But RFK Jr. in some of his rhetoric seems to have gone further, suggesting that the vaccine is responsible for example, millions of deaths, that it killed more people than it saved. And the evidence for that proposition is very scanty. Well, Senator Bill Cassidy sort of trapped RFK Jr. yesterday on this matter. Here he was.
Mr. Secretary, do you agree with me that the president deserves a Nobel Prize for Operation Warp Speed?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. That was phenomenal.
Let me ask you, but you just told Senator Bennett that the COVID vaccine killed more people than COVID.
Wait,
that was a statement.
I did not say that.
Okay, then let me ask, because you also were
Senator, I just want to make clear, I did not say that.
We'll check the record. That's a question of fact. You also said that you were also, as lead attorney for the Children's Health Defense, you engaged in multiple lawsuits attempting to restrict access to the COVID vaccine. Again, it surprises me that you think so highly of Operation Warp Speed when, as an attorney, you attempted to restrict access.
Okay, so again, awkward moment for RFK Jr. RFK Jr. was also asked about whether the vaccine had saved lives. Here was his answer.
Would you accept the fact that 1 million Americans died from COVID? I don't know how many died. You're the Secretary of Health and Human Services. You don't have any idea how many Americans died from COVID? I don't think anybody knows that because there was so much data chaos coming out of the CDC, and there were so many perverse incentives. And these are modeled. You don't know the answer of how many Americans died from COVID. This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Do you think the vaccine did anything to prevent additional deaths? Again, I would like to see the data and talk about the data. You have had this job for 8 months, and you don't know the data about whether the vaccine saved lives? That's the problem, is that they didn't have the data. The data by the Biden administration absolutely dismal.
Okay, so let me just be clear. Public officials should be held to very high levels of scrutiny. They should, across the board. There should be serious questions asked of those public health officials. The Vice President of the United States fired back on all this, defending RFK Jr. by pointing out the fact that the left totally robbed America of its understanding of science and belief in science. He defended RFK Jr. by tweeting out, when I see all these senators trying to lecture and gotcha Bobby Kennedy today, all I can think is, you all support off-label, untested, irreversible hormonal therapies for children, mutilating our kids and enriching Big Pharma. You're full of bleep and everyone knows it. And there's absolutely truth to what J.D. Vance is saying there, the Vice President. That's absolutely true. I've made that point myself. However, when it comes to the standards we use in science, those should be defended. We shouldn't be, especially in a data-driven area, just asking questions. We should be actually seeking real answers with great specificity so we can get to the answers as to whether, for example, the vaccine schedule should be changed. Forget about removing certain vaccines. Should the schedule be changed? Should we tranche it out differently like they do in Europe? Like, these are all, I think, absolutely open questions and interesting questions. So I asked our sponsors over at Comet, Project of Perplexity, how does the European vaccination schedule differ from the American schedule for early childhood? And what Comet says, the European early childhood vaccination schedule is generally more flexible, varies significantly between countries, and often includes fewer mandatory vaccines than the American schedule, which is more standardized, covers more diseases, and typically follows a set timetable nationwide. In the United States, most vaccines are administered at 2, 4, 6, and 12 to 18 months. Some vaccines like Hep B start at birth, others, MMR, varicella, hepatitis A, begin at 12 months. In Europe, some countries adopt slower schedules, spacing vaccines further apart or starting later to allow for immune system development. So these are all open questions and definitely worthy of investigation. But I think if the purpose of the question is not to elicit an answer, but it's just to seed suspicion, that is in and of itself a bit of a problem. And I'd prefer to see HHS being run in a more thoroughgoing way, a way that actually reestablishes trust rather than posing questions that are unanswerable in the extreme. Alrighty, coming up, we are going to get into a fascinating move by the Trump administration. They're now looking at the possibility of using gender identity disorder as a condition barring people from purchasing weapons. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. Well, folks, we'll get to the gigantic media news that Jimmy Kimmel's show is basically cooked. We'll get to why that happened, what the government's involvement was or was not in that. I want to begin, as we've begun every day since the murder of my friend Charlie Kirk, with some tribute to Charlie Kirk, because I think it is important to remember the uplifting, remember the legacy, before we get to, the depressing and upsetting. So Glenn Beck, my friend, hosted Charlie Kirk's show yesterday. Obviously, the Vice President of the United States had the privilege of hosting Charlie's show on Monday. And then the Daily Wire crew, Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, and I hosted Charlie's show on Tuesday. Glenn hosted Charlie's show yesterday. And he did something that I thought was pretty amazing. He brought along the EIB microphone, the Excellence in Broadcasting microphone that Rush Limbaugh used during his days. And he gave it to TPUSA. He put it on the desk in front of Charlie's chair, paying tribute to Charlie. Here was Glenn yesterday.
I brought something with me today that I thought was appropriate while I did the show, that I would sit in front of Charlie's microphone. It was given to me after the death of Rush Limbaugh by his wife. It is Rush's golden microphone. I think it's appropriate that it sits in front of Charlie's microphone.
Very generous gesture by Glenn. Obviously, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, is on Fox News last night with Jesse Waters talking about Charlie in a bit of a town hall. And here he was praising Charlie Kirk, his friend.
I don't want anybody to remember Charlie Kirk and that 5 seconds at the end of his life. I want him to remember Charlie Kirk, the skilled debater. I want him to remember those videos, those incredible videos of him and his wife and his babies and how much he loved Erica and how much he loved those kids. I want him to remember Charlie for that. I want him to remember Charlie for the guy for when it was these kids behind me. Now, I hate to call you guys kids, but you are, who would, a progressive would step up to the microphone at a Turning Points USA event. And some of the audience would jeer and cheer, and Charlie would say, no, let him speak, because he so desperately believed in this idea that we should be talking with and debating one another. So maybe see the video to understand what the far left did to Charlie Kirk, absolutely. But that should be one fraction of 1% of your memory of Charlie Kirk. 99.9% of it should be a titan of the conservative movement, a beloved friend, and a dear husband and father.
JD went on to talk about the fact that there are a lot of people who have been celebrating Charlie's death. That continues today. Schmucks like Keith Olbermann doing that routine, talking about Charlie burning in hell and all the rest. JD Vance said, consequences from civil society are a thing. Now, again, I've been saying for a very, very long time that the kind of low pixelation version of the cancel culture argument is a very stupid argument. That argument is morally relativistic, which is there should never be any consequences for any speech of any kind. That, of course, is unbelievably silly. No one has an obligation to pay you to say dumb crap. No one has an obligation to keep you employed if you celebrate the death of a political commentator with whom you had disagreements. Nobody has that obligation. The original argument against cancel culture is that it has extended so far that the left was canceling people for saying men are not women, for example, or pointing out basic statistics about crime. These were cancelable offenses. That if you were a person working at Google, like James Damore, and you made the point that perhaps women weren't going into the STEM fields at the same rate as men for reasons of both proclivity as well as distributional attributes on test scores. If you made that point, you got canceled. And the point the right made is that's crazy. These are all normie political discussions that we all have all the time. You can't get canceled for that. But if you were making the argument there should never be any consequences from society of any kind for taking positions and saying things that are truly egregious, that's a really stupid argument. And this is the point the vice president is making.
The First Amendment protects a lot of very ugly speech, but if you celebrate Charlie Kirk's death, you should not be protected from being fired for being a disgusting person. If you're a university professor who benefits from American tax dollars, you should not be celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. And if you are, maybe you should lose your job or your university should face a loss of funding. If you are the kind of person who thinks that Charlie Kirk was justifiably murdered, sometimes the government can't do anything about that. But you know what can is civil society. And I've actually been gratified to see all these people standing up and saying, yes, we have free speech, and yes, we have free debate. But if you're celebrating the death of a young father, you ought to pay some consequences for it. And the American people are rising up against that evil. It's a great thing to see.
Okay, so now we need to discuss the difference between civil society's consequences for bad speech, quote unquote cancel culture, in the low pixelation version of that argument, and the activity of government involvement with this. The government should not be involved in trying to force people to say certain things or do certain things with regard to speech. That is not a thing we want the government involved in. And I'm old enough to remember when a lot of conservatives thought that. When a lot of conservatives looked at, for example, the Joe Biden administration's attempts to push and cudgel Facebook into taking down particular types of content around COVID. And they said that's a violation of free speech principles, which it is. And the Supreme Court utterly failed on that question. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. There was a very robust appellate court decision saying that it was, in fact, a violation of the First Amendment for the federal government under Joe Biden to try and force Facebook and other social media sites to take content down. That was a violation of the First Amendment protections of freedom of speech. And then the Supreme Court found kind of shaky grounds for essentially avoiding that question entirely. Okay, with that said, the federal government should not be forcing people to embrace or not embrace certain types of speech in the private realm. That is not something the federal government should be doing. And so the question about what's going on with Jimmy Kimmel right now, because Jimmy Kimmel's show, last night it was announced, has essentially gone off the air. It has been canceled according to the Hollywood Reporter. It's suspended indefinitely. The question is whether that is a result of organic pressure from the crowd, which, if so, great. I'm on board. Jimmy Kimmel is a schmuck. Jimmy Kimmel is the worst. Jimmy Kimmel has been trashed for over 10 years. Jimmy Kimmel went from a funny guy who used to tell jokes, going all the way back to his days on K-Rock, 106.7 in Los Angeles. When I was in high school, I was listening to Kevin and Bean in the morning because my carpool mates refused to listen to anything else. And Jimmy Kimmel was the sports guy, and he was funny and obviously very talented. And then he somehow became a late night host. And after he became a late night host, he decided it became incumbent upon him to become, as my friend Guy Benson has said, the woke pope of late night TV, where he's just going to lecture you every night and be incredibly dickish all the time. And that was his shtick. He was going to go on TV and he was going to lecture you and be terrible. And there are 1,000 times that Jimmy Kimmel should have been canceled. 1,000 times where he said things that were so egregious and terrible and gross that he should have been done. And by the standards of the modern woke media, they should have just dug up his old stuff and gone after him. I mean, there's old tape from The Man Show with Adam Carolla of Jimmy Kimmel groping women without their permission or simulating groping women without their permission. I mean, this is from The Man. This is on Comedy Central back in the day.
Tell us what you think of the statue.
He's literally just going up to a woman and mimicking having sex with her from behind without her knowledge.
Take another look at it.
I mean, being obscene. That didn't get him canceled. Jimmy Kimmel dressed up in blackface back in the day. He dressed up as Karl Malone in blackface. That didn't get him canceled.
My whole thing is this. If there do have such a thing as retardation, Karl Malone don't want to be coming back to Earth as no chicken. Chicken got a dang deal going on here on Earth. Locked up in pan, getting fried up, barbecued, wings getting chopped off and dipped in delicious, tangy hot sauce. Karl Malone do love them hot wings.
Now, in the 90s, they were quite a time. But, I mean, forget about his old stuff, his old stuff. He didn't get canceled for saying that people should die in hospitals if they took ivermectin for COVID, which is a thing he actually said on the air. This captain of empathy.
Dr. Fauci said that if hospitals get any more overcrowded, they're going to have to make some very tough choices about who gets an ICU bed. That choice doesn't seem so tough to me. Vaccinated person having a heart attack? Yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo? Rest in peace, Wheezy.
And so, that's a thing he should have been canceled over. So don't get me wrong. I'm very happy to see Jimmy Kimmel go. Like, for whatever reason, I'm very happy to see him go. He was a horror show. His morality is completely backwards. His obvious dripping disdain and hatred for anyone who disagrees with him is perfectly clear. It is clear. Every night has been clear every night for years. No one could more richly deserve being taken off the air than Jimmy Kimmel. The question is whether the federal government had to do with him being taken off the air. And this is where, again, policy cannot be a blunderbuss. It cannot be. See, Charlie Kirk was killed doing free speech. He was killed engaging in political debate. And one of the legacies that Charlie Kirk leaves is the necessity for such political debate, the necessity for free speech. And again, that doesn't mean speech without consequences. It means the necessity for debate. And what that requires that the government not be involved, for example, in shutting down free debate. So the question with regard to Kimmel is whether this is an organic outgrowth of natural outrage over Jimmy Kimmel, or whether this was forced by the federal government. Alrighty, coming up, we'll get to more on Jimmy Kimmel. Was this government interventionism, or was it just, the public being pissed at Jimmy Kimmel? I mean, the guy is, as I will say 1,000 times the show, a schmuck. First, when was the last time you bragged about your wireless company? Like, did you know my wireless company gave away 1,000 American flags to deserving vets and forgave $10 million in veteran debt? Did you know my wireless company raised almost $500,000 to prevent veteran suicide? When your wireless company is Pure Talk, there's a whole lot to brag about. You can even brag about the coverage you get with Pure Talk, a 5G network that is insanely fast, dependable, and secure. And you can brag about how much money you save with Pure Talk. Unlimited talk, text, 15 gigs of high-speed data is just $35 a month with mobile hotspot. I'm always using Pure Talk because I'm always on my phone. Especially lately, I've relied heavily on the excellent tower network that Pure Talk provides, and of course, their price is great. It's time for you to switch to my wireless company, Pure Talk. But if you need another reason, something you can really brag about, Pure Talk is the only wireless company that gives you a 1-year free membership to Daily Wire Plus when you go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Again, choose a qualifying plan at puretalk.com/Shapiro and relish your free 1-year membership to Daily Wire Plus. Pure Talk, wireless, worth bragging about. Go check them out right now, puretalk.com/Shapiro to get started. Also, whether you're heading to the ranch or exploring the city, the right boots make the big difference. Tecovas crafts quality Western boots for everyone, from seasoned cowboys to first-time boot buyers, with over 200 meticulous steps that deliver broken-in comfort right out of the box. Because when adventure calls, you want to answer in trusty boots. As the leaves start changing colors, it is officially boot season. Let me tell you, as somebody who juggles work, family life, and everything in between, you actually do need a good pair of boots. Look at me. Do I look like a boots guy, like a cowboy boots guy? And yet, Tecovas are excellent, and I wear them. Whether I'm at the office, taking the family out for dinner, or just handling the chaos of weekend activities with the kids, boots are perfect. You can dress them up, you can dress them down. What really sets Tecovas apart is their craftsmanship. These heritage-made cowboy boots are handcrafted in over 200 steps in Leon, Mexico, from the first stitch to the final lemonwood peg. And here's the thing that tells me, again, they are comfortable right out of the box. They're not going to squeeze your feet, make you feel uncomfortable. They're great. And again, if I can wear them, anyone can wear them. Plus, with football season in full swing and all those weekend tailgates and games, Tecovas has some great new colors that are perfect for showing team spirit while keeping your feet comfortable from kickoff through overtime. They know that everyone deserves the perfect fit. Whatever your style, size, or need, they've got you covered. Right now, get 10% off at tecovas.com/Shapiro when you sign up for email and text. That's 10% off at tecovas.com/Shapiro, tecovas.com/Shapiro. See site for details. Tecovas, point your toes west. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Kimmel's late-night talk show is being suspended by ABC over his viral comments about Charlie Kirk. A network spokesperson said Wednesday that Jimmy Kimmel Live will be preempted indefinitely. The network's action came just after Nexstar, one of the biggest owners of local TV stations in the country, including 28 ABC affiliates, said it will preempt the series for the immediate future. A source said that ABC had also heard from at least one other station group about the show, suggesting an affiliate revolt may have played a role in the decision. The dramatic move also follows Federal Communications Commission Chair Brendan Carr threatening to take action against ABC affiliates in the wake of Kimmel suggesting the Kirk shooting suspect was a MAGA Republican during a monologue earlier this week. Supposedly, Kimmel was prepared to address the backlash on Wednesday night shows. He planned to explain what he said and demonstrate how it was taken out of context. It wasn't. So let's begin by playing the clip that effectively got Kimmel thrown off the air. Here is the original Kimmel tape.
We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In between the finger pointing, there was grieving. On Friday, the White House flew the flags at half staff, which got some criticism. But on a human level, you can see how hard the president is taking this.
My condolences on the loss of your friend Charlie Kirk. May I ask, sir, personally, how are you holding up over the last day and a half, sir?
I think very good. And by the way, right there, you see all the trucks? They just started construction of the new ballroom for the White House, which is something they've been trying to get, as you know, for about 150 years. And it's going to be a beauty.
Yes. He's at the fourth stage of grief, construction. There's demolition, construction. This is not how an adult grieves the murder of someone he called a friend. This is how a 4-year-old mourns a goldfish.
So it wasn't the last part that got Kimmel suspended. It was the first part where he said that the shooter was one of their own. It was a MAGA person. Now, by the time that Kimmel broadcast this on Monday night, it was perfectly clear that was not true. Perfectly clear. I'd said it the week before. We all knew. Also, there was new evidence that it wasn't true. We talked about that evidence on Monday. All the evidence that showed that the shooter was, in fact, that the shooter murdered Charlie because the shooter was in a relationship, a gay relationship with a trans furry and had decided that Charlie was hateful because Charlie said that men were not women and all the like. We knew that already. So, was Kimmel lying? I believe Kimmel was lying. I believe Kimmel knew. I also know that there are a bunch of delusional people on the left, truly delusional, who are trying to pretend away what happened by saying that either the shooter had no political motivations at all, which is totally crazy, or that the shooter was even MAGA, which is even crazier. So maybe in his own head, he was part of that delusional crew that thought that because the shooter grew up in a MAGA house, that meant that he was MAGA, despite the fact that, again, all evidence shows he was anything but, that he was a far leftist who believed that Charlie was, quote unquote, hateful for saying that men were not women, and was hateful because he disagreed with Charlie Kirk because, he was in love with another man pretending to be a woman dressing as a dog. I know, it's like a bad joke. It's really one of the worst jokes, even worse than some of the jokes that Jimmy Kimmel told. Okay, so the question is, and this is really the question, whether these local affiliates canceled Kimmel because they were upset with Kimmel, or whether they canceled Kimmel because they came under pressure from the FCC. So Nexstar ABC put out a statement, quote, Nexstar Media Group today announced that the company's owned and partner television stations affiliated with the ABC television network would preempt Jimmy Kimmel Live for the foreseeable future, beginning with tonight's show. Nexstar strongly objects to recent comments made by Mr. Kimmel concerning the killing of Charlie Kirk and will replace the show with other programming in its ABC-affiliated markets. Mr. Kimmel's comments about the death of Mr. Kirk are offensive and insensitive at a critical time in our national political discourse, and we do not believe they reflect the spectrum of opinions, views, or values of the local communities in which we are located, said Andrew Alford, president of Nexstar's broadcasting division. Continuing to give Mr. Kimmel a broadcast platform in the communities we serve is simply not in the public interest at the current time, and we have made the difficult decision to preempt his show in an effort to let cooler heads prevail as we move toward the resumption of respectful, constructive dialogue. Okay, now the question is, was that natural? Or was that a result of the fact that Nexstar is currently trying to push a $6.2 billion merger through FCC scrutiny? And the fact that the FCC chair, Brandon Carr, went on Benny Johnson's show where he effectively threatened action against Kimmel, ABC, and Disney.
They have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with it an obligation to operate in the public interest. And we can get into some ways that we've been trying to reinvigorate the public interest and some changes that we've seen. But frankly, when you see stuff like this, I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or, there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. It appears to be clear that you could make a strong argument that this is sort of an intentional effort to mislead the American people about a very core fundamental fact to a very important matter. At the end of the day, if we do get called upon to cast a vote on this, Disney will have a chance to put in their arguments and explain it. But this is a very, very serious issue right now for Disney.
Okay, let me be clear about this. I like Brendan Carr. I do. The FCC should not be threatening action against ABC or its affiliates or Disney based on Jimmy Kimmel being a jackass. He's been a jackass his entire career. Social censure is perfectly appropriate. The blowback from the public, totally natural and in fact good, because Jimmy Kimmel is in fact a schmuck who should have been taken off the air 10 years ago. I do not want the FCC in the business of telling local affiliates that their licenses will be removed if they broadcast material that the FCC deems to be informationally false. Why? Because one day the shoe will be on the other foot. I know that we've gotten out of the habit of this. I know that there are a lot of people on the right who say the shoe will never be on the other foot. And if it is, the left will just do it anyway. Here is the thing. Preemptively breaking things because you believe that the left is going to break the things makes the things broken, and you can't unbreak the things. So I'm an advocate of the idea that things that are not yet broken probably should not be. And if we are now in a world where we're going to preemptively break the plate because we believe that the bad guy is going to break the plate, all the plates are going to get broken. And regardless of what you do, that's going to get used against you. The shards will be used as weapons against you. I promise you, if the FCC is removing local affiliate licenses or threatening to do so based on Jimmy Kimmel being a jackass, the next time a Democrat is elected, which will happen, this country is split 50-50. Pretending that this country is split 80-20 does no one any good. The Congress is split effectively 50-50. The Senate of the United States is split almost 50-50. It is split 53-47. The last presidential election, which President Trump won, he did not win in a blowout. I will remind you that Kamala Harris, an awful, terrible, horrifying candidate, somehow achieved in the popular vote 48.3%, and Donald Trump won 49.8%. And so we should stop pretending that this is not a closely divided country and that Democrats will never win again. First of all, just on principle, I do not think that the FCC should be involved in this sort of stuff. I think there's a better case that the FCC should not even be involved in granting broadcast licenses to local affiliates anymore. We now live in an age of digital and cable. I don't think that we need the FCC to regulate this sort of stuff this way in the first place. I'm for total deregulation. But if you are going to have regulations on the books, then they have to be evenly administered. And so again, I'm not saying Kimmel shouldn't be taken off the air. I'm not saying that social sanction shouldn't have forced him off the air. I'm not saying any of these local affiliates shouldn't have said they don't want to take Kimmel anymore. I'm saying they should have done all of that 10 years ago. And I'm not sure what happened here. If, best case scenario, the public forced the local affiliates to react and take Kimmel off the air, totally legit. I do not like that the FCC muddied the waters here. I think it is bad politics and I think it is bad policy. The fact that the FCC is trying to use standards about broadcasting false information in this way, I think is a negative. According to FCC rules, the FCC prohibits broadcasting false information about a crime or catastrophe if the broadcaster knows the information is false and will cause substantial public harm if aired. That should be a relatively high bar because I'm just telling you, if Democrats win the presidency and you got a Democrat in charge of the FCC, you got Adam Schiff in charge of the FCC, you know which affiliates are going to get threatened? All of the Fox affiliates. You know that's going to happen. It will. If the rumors are true and CBS News is about to make a significant shift back toward the center and suddenly broadcast things conservatives are not against, if that is a true thing, you can bet dollars to donuts that under a Democrat president, suddenly CBS affiliates will come under fire. This is why we don't want the state involved in these things. And here's the problem. Brendan Carr, right, over at the FCC, he then put out a statement, quote, "I want to thank Nexstar for doing the right thing. Local broadcasters have an obligation to serve the public interest. While this may be an unprecedented decision, it is important for broadcasters to push back on Disney programming that they determine falls short of community values. I hope other broadcasters follow Nexstar's lead." Again, shoe on the other foot. If this were a Democrat at the FCC who were saying, "I want to thank Nexstar for canceling all affiliates of Fox thanks to something that Sean Hannity said, or that back in the day Tucker Carlson said on the air," would the right be okay with that? Or would they be claiming, quite properly, that that is massive regulatory overreach, unprecedented in scope? Already coming up, the President of the United States decides it's time to crack down on Antifa plus Ta-Nehisi Coates. Yes, he's back from defending Hamas now. He's going to speak about the evils of political violence. It turns out that actually, Charlie, his rhetoric, that was the big problem. First, when we started Daily Wire, it felt like we had to figure everything out with minimal help. You know, we had the editorial guidelines, studio setup, production schedule, branding. All that stuff was overwhelming. New decisions were needed daily. Finding one tool that simplifies everything when starting a business is a game changer and a lifesaver. For millions of business, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. We even use it for our own Daily Wire shop to make sure things are running smoothly and efficiently so you can get all the goods. So you might be asking, what if I can't design a website? Or I'm worried people haven't heard of my brand. Well, good news, Shopify's got you covered from the start. They've got beautiful, ready-to-go templates that match your brand's style and help you find your customers through easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. And if you need a hand with everyday tasks, their AI tools created specifically for commerce can help enhance product images, write descriptions, and more. Plus, their award-winning customer support is available 24/7 to share advice if you ever get stuck. Turn those dreams into and give them the best shot at success with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial. Start selling today at shopify.com/Shapiro. Go to shopify.com/Shapiro. Shopify.com/Shapiro. Also, what does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts. You'll get 10 different answers. The market is bullish one day, bearish the next. Interest rates climb or plummet. Inflation goes up, it goes down, all depending on who's making the forecast. In a world of endless predictions and conflicting signals, wouldn't it be nice if somebody could finally invent that crystal ball? Well, until that happens, over 43,000 businesses have future-proofed themselves with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 AI cloud ERP that seamlessly integrates accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one unified platform. This single source of truth delivers the visibility and control needed for rapid decision-making, while real-time insights and forecasting transform raw data into actionable intelligence about what lies ahead. When you're closing the books in days rather than weeks, you spend less time analyzing the past and more time preparing for the future. Whether your company generates millions or hundreds of millions in revenue, NetSuite empowers you to tackle immediate challenges while positioning you to capitalize on your biggest opportunities. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/Shapiro. That's netsuite.com/Shapiro. netsuite.com/Shapiro. President Trump thanked ABC for canceling Kimmel because he hates Jimmy Kimmel. Properly so. He should hate Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel's a schmuck. I can't say it enough. I think Jimmy Kimmel's despicable. The president put out a statement, great news for America. The ratings challenged Jimmy Kimmel show is canceled. Congratulations to ABC for finally having the courage to do what had to be done. Kimmel has zero talent and worse ratings than even Colbert, if that's possible. That leaves Jimmy and Seth, two total losers on fake news NBC. Their ratings are also horrible. Do it, NBC. President Donald J. Trump. Now, again, if this is just President Trump cheering from the sidelines, agree on every part of that. Jimmy Kimmel is utterly untalented. The other hosts are terrible. They should go. They have terrible ratings. All of that's true. The federal government, the imprimatur of the federal government here, is a problem. It is not good. Brian Stelter reached out for comment, apparently, to Brendan Carr. He said, I asked FCC Chair Brendan Carr if he had any new comment now that ABC has pulled Jimmy Kimmel's show, and he sent a GIF, and the GIF is of Dwight Schrute and Michael Scott raising the roof from The Office. Like we did it. Why? Okay, why? Just let the public be outraged and let the public outrage organically drive the thing. Why? Now you've muddied the waters in a serious way. Legally, you've muddied the waters on First Amendment grounds, on FCC over-regulatory grounds, in much the same way that the Biden administration was threatening Facebook with consequences if they did not remove certain material. I mean, this is an open threat, actually. Now you've muddied the waters. And not only have you muddied the waters on Kimmel, you have now retroactively muddied the waters on Colbert. Because again, the claim the left was making, and the reason they're valorizing, again, one of the other terrible hosts on late night TV, Stephen Colbert, the reason they valorized him is because he got fired. He got fired because his ratings sucked and he was totally underwater monetarily. His show was losing tens of millions of dollars every year. That's the real reason he was fired. But the left claimed that he was fired due to pressure from the administration. Because they are building a narrative now. And the narrative they are trying to build is that President Trump and his team are in authoritarian fashion destroying things like freedom of speech. And the case they're trying to build as a comeback from the horrible story of Charlie's death, a story that is terrible for the radical left, truly terrible, because the American people have reacted with unprecedented force and fury at what happened to Charlie. What the left is now going to attempt to do is jujitsu that reaction into the belief that the Trump administration is overreacting. When you have a moment to do the right thing, you have to be, as an administration, calculated and meticulous in how you pursue this stuff. I was talking to my friend Chris Rufo about this shortly after Charlie was shot. And we were talking about the fact that no one is more effective at this than Chris Rufo. And Chris was saying, and he said this publicly, obviously, you cannot afford to have blunders like the Attorney General Pam Bondi out there saying that hate speech needs to be regulated. Because that's uncalibrated. It doesn't get the job done. And not only that, it creates backlash. President Trump was elected in part based on the idea that he was going to maintain freedom of speech. He was elected in part based on the backlash to true cancel culture, the broadening of the Overton window, the opening of the speech aperture. That was a thing that President Trump was elected based on. And if you wish to hand power back to the Democrats, what you do here is you overreach, or at least even create the perception of overreach. So, two things can be true at once, as always. I'm very, very happy Jimmy Kimmel's off the air. For the 9th time, he is a putz, a schmuck, and a schmendrick. There's a lot of Yiddish on today's show. He's the worst. Can't stand Jimmy Kimmel. Can't stand him going back 10 years when he was trying to use the heart surgery of his son to argue for nationalized health care, pretending that it gave him some sort of new expertise into the healthcare system. I made the point on my show. My daughter had open heart surgery that same year from the same surgeon, and that had no impact on my healthcare views because one thing has nothing to do with the other. Jimmy Kimmel's awful. Happy to see him go. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. The government should not be doing this thing. They should not be muddying the waters. And if they do, then they put themselves at risk of significant overreach. Now, meanwhile, we have new details that have emerged about the shooter in this case. According to the UK Daily Mail, a sickening cache of searches have been revealed about the suspect. He was involved in a furry shades of gay game. Well, I can't imagine why he would have shot Charlie then. One of the things that I find absolutely amusing about many of the members of the left when it comes to this is they'll say, well, it wasn't a political issue, it was a personal issue. It was personal because, you see, this guy was a gay furry. He was a gay furry in love with a trans gay furry. And that means that it was about his personal proclivities. It wasn't political. It was the left that originally contended the personal is political. In this case, the personal is political. It is. Read the texts. Go look at what he was saying, what he was telling friends and family. He believed that his gay furry lifestyle was under threat from people like Charlie Kirk, who were intolerant of the insanity of the trans ideology. And then he shot Charlie. It is no surprise at all to find that this person was not, contrary to the popular opinion of the left apparently, a Romeo and Juliet character in a gay romance, that actually he was a sexual sicko. None of that is particularly shocking, obviously. It is, frankly, absolutely predictable. Apparently, he used a pseudonym on Steam where he played a pornographic online game called Furry Shades of Gay, according to the UK Daily Mail. Apparently, he also followed artists who drew explicit cartoons associated with pedophilia. The Daily Mail cited Tyler Robinson's friends to report that he used the account name Crafton247 on his gaming and online accounts. The 22-year-old reportedly played Furry Shades of Gay, a game that has described itself as being about love, queer relationships, hot gay and slapstick humor on Steam in 2020. And apparently this appeared on a furry site, furaffinity.com, a website for people with a proclivity for humanoid animal illustrations and dressing up in fursuits. I can't imagine, by the way, the media were trying to say that his parents were intolerant and terrible. I can't imagine why they might have objected to their son becoming a weird freak. I can't imagine why. And I say that advisedly. Yes, if you are visiting Furry Shades of Gay, you are, in fact, a weird freak. Ain't nothing I can do about it. That's a you problem, my friend. And blaming society for your ills and then shooting people based on those ills does not make you a romantic character. It just underscores the politics associated with sick freakdom. It is, insane that the left has attempted to craft these permission structures. Ta-Nehisi Coates, the egregiously horrible writer. I mean, I'm always amazed at how people can pretend that the Ta-Nehisi Coates is somehow a great writer. Truly, it is an amazing thing. You have to be incapable of reading to believe that Ta-Nehisi Coates is a great writer. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a joke. He doesn't know how to think. He's a purple writer who will use 3 adjectives where 0 would do. He's overwrought. He's hysterical. And he hates the country. I mean, truly hates America. Ta-Nehisi Coates. And Western civilization more broadly. He has an entire piece over at Vanity Fair, basically blaming Charlie for his own murder. Quote, Kirk subscribed to some of the most disreputable and harmful beliefs that this country has ever known. And Charlie Kirk, about as normie a Republican as you can find. But it is still chilling to think that those beliefs would be silenced by a gunshot. The tragedy is personal. Kirk was robbed of his life, and his children and family will forever live with the knowledge that a visual record of that robbery is just an internet search away. And the tragedy is national. Political violence ends conversation and invites war. Its rejection is paramount to a functioning democracy and a free society. I love hearing this from Ta-Nehisi Coates, who literally said that he watched 9/11 happen while stoned on the roof of an apartment building and didn't feel anything. A person whose last book was all about the wonders, effectively, of Palestinian terrorism. He never even mentions in a book about Israel and the Palestinians terrorism, not once, because the entire book is a tacit justification for Palestinian murder and terrorism. He's very angry at Ezra Klein of the New York Times. I did an interview with Ezra a couple of weeks ago before Charlie's shooting. It finally aired earlier this week. It was a very cordial conversation. I've had many cordial conversations with Ezra, as I've had cordial conversations with many people with whom I disagree on the left. And many of those people were texting me and calling me to find out not only if I was okay, obviously I am, thank God, but also to express their horror, shock, dismay at what happened to Charlie. This is not a complete right-left thing, meaning there are radical leftists who endorse political violence and then tacitly endorse the thought structures that lead to it. Ta-Nehisi Coates does that. He is part of the permission structure for violence, Ta-Nehisi Coates. And then there are people who are on the rational side of the left. They disagree with me on a lot of issues, but also they understand that these permission structures for violence are bad and wrong. And I got a call from, 24 of them over the course of the last week, including Ezra Klein, So Ezra wrote a piece in which he lamented the death of Charlie Kirk and said basically he was engaged in normie political conversation, which is true. And normie political conversation is fraught. And one of the games we can always play when any political commentator dies or is killed, you can always play this game, is go find bad old tweets. Go find a statement that if you take it out of context, looks really, really bad, and then pretend that that person is that statement. You can play that game all day long, and it's the world's dumbest game, truly the dumbest game. But Ta-Nehisi Coates is angry at Ezra Klein. He's enraged at Ezra Klein for having the temerity to suggest that Charlie's murder was really, really bad and that Charlie himself was not, in fact, an extremist, because Charlie was, in fact, not an extremist. So here's what Ta-Nehisi Coates writes. Political violence is a virtue, Klein noted. This assertion is true. It is also at odds with Kirk's own words. Absolute nonsense. Charlie never called for political violence, not once. That's insane. It's not merely that Kirk, as Klein put it, defended the Second Amendment. It's that Kirk endorsed hurting people to advance his preferred policy outcomes. Okay, there is not a single time that Charlie Kirk suggested, quote unquote, hurting people, using violence in order to achieve a political outcome. It is only Ta-Nehisi Coates who, in his tacit and not so tacit endorsement of terrorism, has done so repeatedly. So what does he say? Quote, what are we to make of a man who called for the execution of the American president and then was executed himself? What in the world? What in the world? What he said about Joe Biden is that Joe Biden was a tyrant and should be put in prison and or given the death penalty. That is not calling for the murder of Joe Biden. I disagree with that. I think it's overwrought. But the notion that that is a call for overt political violence, I mean, that's a thing that Democrats say routinely about President Trump, all the while calling him Hitler, by the way. But here's what Ta-Nehisi Coates, again, just one of the true garbage bags in the literature industry, and also given control of comic books for DC, which is just shows you how far the left the culture is. What are we to make of an NFL that on one hand encourages us to end racism and on the other urges us to commemorate an unreconstructed white supremacist? Ta-Nehisi Coates, an unreconstructed white supremacist? Charlie Kirk literally fought off the Nick Fuentes white supremacists. That's why they hated him. And what of the writers, the thinkers, and the pundits who cannot separate the great crime of Kirk's death from the malignancy of his public life? Can they truly be so ignorant to the words of a man they've rushed to memorialize? I don't know. But the most telling detail in Klein's column was that, for all his praise, there was not a single word in the piece from Kirk himself. Well, I mean, I could fill literally entire books with Charlie's normie political commentary. We all could, because it was pretty normie. Again, for the left, the desire to treat Charlie as an other, who therefore was somehow responsible for his own death, that temptation is so strong because they have to project. They have to. With the left, every accusation is in fact an admission. Every accusation is truly an attempt to externalize a problem with themselves. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a writer who has spent years creating permission structures for violence. But he's angry at Charlie after Charlie is murdered. Meanwhile, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, he continues somehow to pretend that the burning of the gubernatorial mansion in Pennsylvania with him and his family inside, that somehow that was the result of right-wing political violence. My dude, you got nearly burned to death by a pro-Palestine activist. And let us be clear where those reside. They reside on the political left. And here's Josh Shapiro being truly, truly unintelligent.
Unfortunately, some, from the dark corners of the internet all the way to the Oval Office, want to cherry pick which instances of political violence they want to condemn. Listen, doing that only further divides us, and it makes it harder to heal. Violence is never the answer, and we cannot allow violence to be used as a pretext for more violence.
And it's hey, how about more vagary? How about more, meaningless blather? How about that? Just more gibbering and jabbering. Already coming up, Barack Obama signs into chat just what America needed. First, I'm sure most of us think home security means waiting for something bad to happen, an alarm shrieking after someone had already broken in, hoping it would scare them off or maybe alert a neighbor. But here is the thing. Once the intruder is inside, the damage is largely done. Your sense of security, that fundamental feeling of safety in your own space, has been violated. Real protection isn't about responding to a crime. It's about preventing one from happening in the first place. That's exactly why I've partnered with SimpliSafe, a system built around the idea that the best security is proactive and not reactive. Here's how it works. SimpliSafe uses smart AI-powered cameras to identify threats lurking outside your home and immediately alert their professional monitoring agents. These agents intervene in real time before the break-in even begins. They access two-way audio to confront the person, trigger sirens and spotlights to scare them off, and request rapid police dispatch when needed, all helping to stop the intruder while they're still outside. That's real security. I've joined the more than 4 million Americans who trust SimpliSafe with their home security every day. With a 60-day money-back guarantee, no long-term contract, SimpliSafe earns your business by keeping you safe and satisfied every day. Here at the office, we don't just have people that I care about. We also have, equipment and stuff. And we have to make sure it's protected, which is why we rely on SimpliSafe. Visit simplisafe.com/Shapiro. Claim 50% off a new system. That's simplisafe.com/Shapiro. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Also, if you've been living on credit cards just to cover groceries, gas, bills, interest rates on credit cards are insane. Why would you keep paying 20% or more to the bank when you could call my friends over at American Financing? They have mortgage rates in the 5s now. They are showing people every day how to keep more of your hard-earned money in your pocket and out of the hands of those credit card companies. Right now, American Financing is helping homeowners save an average of $800 a month by using their home equity to wipe out high-interest debt with no upfront fees and no obligation, just a 10-minute call to a salary-based mortgage consultant. Here's the kicker. If you start today, you could delay 2 mortgage payments. That puts even more cash in your hands right away when you need it. Don't wait. Call American Financing now. 866-574-2500. That's 866-574-2500. Or check them out at americanfinancing.net/Shapiro. Again, I know there are a lot of people out there. They've racked up the debt. They've got those credit cards to pay off. Why not work with my friends at American Financing to come up with an alternative solution that's going to help you now and down the road? Give them a call, 866-574-2500. That's 866-574-2500. Okay, so Barack Obama has decided to weigh in, which is just what America needed. We needed Barack Obama, who truly was an unbelievably polarizing figure. I know that the left has this vision that Barack Obama was a unifier. He was not. He ran as a unifier in 2008, and then he lied. It is one of the signal sins of our political history that Barack Obama, who was elected to unify America, no red America, no blue America, just Americans, no black Americans, no white Americans, just Americans. You remember it. I remember it because I am older than 5 moments old. And then he proceeded to polarize America by governing hard left and attributing the backlash to his far left governance to America's deep history of deep-seated racism. Well, yesterday, he was doing another obnoxious interview in which he says that we are at an inflection point with regard to political violence. I mean, I wonder how we got to this inflection point. How could we have done it? I mean, sure, it might have been that time that you effectively justified rioting in Ferguson. It could have been that. Or maybe it was that time, as we will get to, where you basically blamed the police for their own murders in Dallas. Maybe it could have been, but no, he was just too genteel. He was too genteel. Here's Barack Obama. Again, a man who considers himself holier than the Pope. Here we go.
We are certainly at an inflection point, not just around political violence, but there are a host of larger trends that we have to be concerned about. I think it is important for us at the outset to acknowledge that political violence is not new. It has happened at certain periods in our history.
Well, thank you for that. He continued by saying, he disagreed with Charlie Kirk on everything, but he wasn't empowering extreme. And then he blamed Trump. Of course. It's always about Trump. You see, he had nothing to do with the election of Donald Trump. I mean, sure, it was a direct backlash to Barack Obama, but it had nothing to do with him, obviously. He's just an observer, a passive observer in America's national history.
When it happens to some, but even if you think they're quote unquote on the other side of the argument, that's a threat to all of us. And we have to be clear and forthright in condemning it. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have a debate about the ideas that people who were victims of political violence we're promoting. And so I've noticed that there's been some confusion, I think, around this lately. And frankly, coming from the White House and some of the other positions of authority that suggest, even before we had determined who the perpetrator of this evil act was, that somehow we're going to identify an enemy. We're going to suggest that somehow that enemy was at fault, and we are then going to use that as a rationale for trying to silence discussion around who we are as a country and what direction we should go.
So here's the thing. When Barack Obama does this, remember, this ties back into that FCC discussion we were having earlier. This right here is the narrative the left wants to retail. The narrative the left wants to retail is that Charlie Kirk's shooting is not about Charlie Kirk's shooting. And it's not about the left. It's not about the left's ties with political violence. It is not about the groups that support those political acts of violence. It is not about that. It's about the backlash to free speech. Right? So that is one of the reasons I'm objecting to muddying the waters with the kinds of stuff that we are saying with regard to the FCC. Just going to note that by way of explaining. Here's President Obama continuing.
Obviously, I didn't know Charlie Kirk. I was generally aware of some of his ideas. I think those ideas were wrong. But that doesn't negate the fact that what happened was a tragedy and that I mourn for him and his family. He's a young man with 2 small children and a wife who obviously, and a huge number of friends and supporters who cared about him. And so we have to extend grace to people during their period of mourning and shock. We can also, at the same time, say that I disagree with the idea that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a mistake.
Okay, so he's extending grace to Charlie. Charlie gets shot, and he's not talking about the left-wing ideologue who shot him. He's not talking about the movement that created the impetus for violence. He is extending grace to Charlie. Don't worry, this is Captain Anti-Polarization. He's extending his grace to Charlie because Charlie got shot. Well, isn't that nice of him? Isn't that generous of him? What a self-centered. Here we go.
That's not me politicizing the issue. It's making an observation about who are we as a country. I can say that I disagree with the suggestion that my wife or Justice Jackson does not have adequate brain processing power. I can
okay, pause it for a second. Okay, if you actually go back to what Charlie said about the quote-unquote brain processing power. I want to read you the direct quote. If we would have said 3 weeks ago that Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson were affirmative action picks, we would have been called racist. But now they're coming out and they're saying it for us. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously. Okay, so his argument there is, if you say that someone required affirmative action, that is a tacit admission the person does not have the processing power that would have let them in just based purely on merit. That was Charlie's argument. But again, the idea that Obama is putting forth here is that Charlie was a racist. That is what he is trying to retail here.
We have to recognize that on both sides, undoubtedly there are people who are extremists and who say things that are contrary to what I believe are America's core values. But I will say that those extreme views were not in my White House. I wasn't embracing them. I wasn't empowering them. I wasn't putting the weight of the United States government behind extremist views. And that is when we have the weight of the United States government behind extremist views, we've got a problem.
So it's Trump's fault because in his White House, they never emboldened extremist views, ever. I mean, that's something he never emboldened extremist views. So really, it's the people who embolden the extremist views. So eventually he does get to the permission structures for violence, but then he basically says it's coming from President Trump. I will note at this point that Barack Obama labeled his political opponents enemies effectively all the time. It happened all the time. He literally had a man helping to run his national security agency, Ben Rhodes, a national security advisor, who was nicknamed Hamas. Barack Obama is a person who retailed the suggestion that opposition to gay marriage was in and of itself bigotry and evil. Barack Obama used the occasion of people being shot in order to promote the agenda of the shooters. And here was Barack Obama's speech with regard to a Ferguson grand jury decision over Michael Brown. I'll never forget this one. Michael Brown was a criminal who robbed a convenience store. And then when Michael Brown was confronted by a police officer, he reached into the police officer's car, discharged the police officer's gun, tried to run away, and then turned around and charged at the police officer. A series of lies were then told about the police officer. The suggestion was made that he had shot Michael Brown in the back in cold blood. That's where the whole hands up, don't shoot routine came from the political left. It was all a pack of lies. Every single bit of it was a lie. And then, after a grand jury decided not to indict based on actual evidence, the president of the United States got up and said that actually none of it was a lie. People don't just make things up like this while the rioting was happening. But don't worry, he never emboldened extremism, Barack Obama.
What is also true is that there are still problems, and communities of color aren't just making these problems up. Separating that from this particular decision, there are issues in which the law too often feels as if it is being applied in a discriminatory fashion.
By the way, like the city was burning at this time. So that's a justification of the rioters. That's what that was. He would say, no, I'm against rioting. It's really bad. But the rioters do have a point. You do have to acknowledge their concerns. Here's Barack Obama's speech after the murder. This is actually at a memorial service for slain Dallas police officers who were shot by a Black Lives Matter activist. Here is Barack Obama basically ripping on the officers.
And while some suffer far more under racism's burden, some feel to a far greater extent discrimination's sting. Although most of us do our best to guard against it and teach our children better, none of us is entirely innocent. No institution is entirely immune. And that includes our police departments. We know this.
Just amazing. Just amazing. But don't worry, he never elevated extremism. Again, this is why I say it's not enough to say political violence is bad. We all understand political violence is bad. Okay, or we should. But saying that is the equivalent of just saying violence is bad. It's a childish sentiment. It's a childish but true sentiment, but it doesn't actually do anything. What you actually need to do is call out the permission structures that enable this violence. The permission structures, the ideologies that foment this violence. And if you forward those ideologies while simultaneously claiming to be against political violence, I don't really believe you. I'm sorry, I don't. Meanwhile, President Trump has announced that he is going to target Antifa. He calls it a sick, dangerous, radical left disaster as a major terrorist organization. I will also be strongly recommending that those funding Antifa be thoroughly investigated in accordance with the highest legal standards and practices. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, Antifa is a very loosely agglomerated group. It involves a bunch of people who sort of cobbled together. It's not like a rigid top-down hierarchy, but using law enforcement resources to go after Antifa groups is definitely worthwhile because it is an inherently violent organization, without a doubt. It is worth noting it this way, by the way, that Antifa is trying to actually facilitate, according to their own documents, they're trying to facilitate conflict on the right in order to distract from their own actions on the left. Quote, one possibly useful wedge issue in this context is Israel. Conspiracy theorists have already jumped to blame Kirk's assassination on Mossad, claiming the lifelong Zionist was on the verge of becoming J-pilled. That's Antifa saying it. So, yeah, probably you should believe the people who were associated in a loose way, at the very least, with the shooter. Probably that seems like a good thing to do, is probably do their work for them ideologically. Now, that's a smart move. Meanwhile, the president of the United States is making moves to stop so-called debanking. Debanking is when a bank decides that you are outside their ideological predilections, and they are therefore not going to allow you to have a bank account. And again, just like cancel culture, debanking has been applied to an enormous number of people who are just sort of mainstream. According to the Wall Street Journal, banks are now in the crosshairs. Many MAGA Republicans, Christian conservatives, and cryptocurrency libertarians say America's banks are shutting down the personal and business accounts of people whose politics they don't agree with, or are unfairly refusing to work with certain industries, such as gun manufacturers or coal companies. The Alliance Defending Freedom is bringing these tales to Congress, and the Trump administration is acting. In August, the president issued an executive order demanding an investigation into politicized or unlawful debanking. So that is a positive thing the Trump administration is doing as well. Meanwhile, an immigration judge has now ruled that Mahmoud Khalil, the pro-terrorist activist with the green card, should be deported to Syria or Algeria because, as it turns out, he did not disclose certain information on his green card application, including that he worked for the UNRWA, which is in fact just a wing of Hamas. The UN Refugee Works Agency has been dedicated to the Palestinian cause since effectively 1949. And the UNRWA is just a tool of Hamas. And he didn't put that on his documents when he entered the country. So, yeah, I mean, that seems like a good reason to get rid of him. We never should have been let in the country in the first place. In a letter to the New Jersey federal judge, Khalil's lawyer said they have 30 days from September 12th to appeal her decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Apparently, the appeal court almost never grants stays of removal to non-citizens. So it is very likely that Khalil is in fact going to be deported, which would be a net benefit to the country. We do not need people like Mahmoud Khalil, one of the leaders of the Columbia University pro-terror protest movement, which engaged in criminal activity. We don't need that guy in the country. Well, bye. Meanwhile, in economic news, the Fed cut the interest rates by 1/4 point and signaled that more cuts are likely yesterday. Here was Jerome Powell, the head of the Federal Reserve.
There wasn't widespread support at all for a 50 basis point cut today. You know, I think we've done very large rate hikes and very large rate cuts in the last 5 years, and you tend to do those at a time when you feel that policy is out of place and needs to move quickly to a new place. That's not at all what I feel certainly now. I feel like our policy has been doing the right thing so far this year. I think we were right to wait and see how tariffs and inflation and the labor market evolved. I think we're now reacting to the much lower level of job creation and other evidence of softening in the labor market and saying, well, those risks are maybe not fully balanced, but moving in the direction of balance now. And so that warrants a change in policy.
So, again, the markets kind of roiled at this. They didn't jump on this news. I think President Trump was expecting the markets to jump on the news. They really didn't. The reason being that Powell is acknowledging a slowing jobs market. And that is the reason why he is having to lower the interest rates. So he's not doing it because the job markets are robust and inflation is coming down. He's doing it because inflation is coming down and the job markets are, in fact, not robust. And so the markets are reading that. The Wall Street Journal points out that President Trump now has control of the interest rates. He's got the Federal Reserve policy he wants. And so whatever comes next, it is very difficult to blame on Joe Biden. Quote, in their summary of economic projections released after this week's meeting, Fed officials anticipate 2 more 25-point rate cuts this year and another in 2026. Yet the same SEP projections concede that inflation is proving more persistent than anticipated. They now expect personal consumption expenditure inflation to hit 2.6% next year. That's up from 2.4% predicted in June, they don't actually expect to hit the rate of 2% until 2028. So even though inflation is still 50% higher, 40% higher than it should be, they're afraid that the economy is slowing significantly. As the Wall Street Journal points out, Powell struggled to articulate how monetary policy might make a difference. Neither of the negatives he mentioned, tariffs and President Trump's immigration crackdown, can be offset by lowering interest rates. Otherwise, he said, it's not a bad economy. Booming stock valuations and investor enthusiasm for low-quality debt, among other symptoms, suggest financial conditions aren't especially tight as it is. They're making the point, basically, that the underlying factors in the economy that are weak are not going to be cured by cutting the interest rates. I think that is largely true. I think what you are likely to see is more of a bubble on the tech side. If that bubble bursts, it will be a worse downside. And if you really want a booming economy, you should hope that the Supreme Court strikes down President Trump's tariffs. It really is that simple at this point. Alrighty, folks, the show is continuing for our members right now. We're going to get into more of the Epstein debate. What is the evidence show? Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.